Some time ago, we made a video about how table saw kickback occurs and how to avoid it. This was an important safety video that's been watched by nearly 2 million woodworkers, and I hope it saved a few fingers. But sometimes some folks can misunderstand a safety rule and actually over-apply it in such a way that they miss out on some very useful techniques. First, I'll show you the rule I'm talking about. Then I'll tell you when it's okay to break it. Here's the clip in question. Sometimes new woodworkers feel like they want to cut 5 inches off the end of a workpiece. And so they'll get their miter gauge set up and they'll set their fence at 5 inches and they'll put the workpiece up against the fence and they'll think, well, I can just make a cut in this position and it's going to be all right. It's not going to be all right because this workpiece towards the end of the cut, the offcut is going to turn and it's going to pinch against the back of the blade and shoot back at you. So you should never allow an offcut like this to come free from the main workpiece between the fence and the blade. Anybody with experience using the table saw will agree that usually making a crosscut with the miter gauge and the rip fence together is a no-no for the reason I just described. You have to get that fence away from the offcut so nothing will get caught. That rule is drilled into new woodworkers so much that some see all sorts of red flags when a miter gauge comes within 10 feet of a rip fence. But the fact is, the rip fence does indeed make an excellent stop to reference repeated cuts, even crosscuts, if you know when and how to do it. Today I'll give you some tips for using the rip fence and the miter gauge together for safer and accurate cuts. For example, let's say I need to cut a bunch of identical half-inch rabbets to make some simple boxes. I don't have to worry about the precise thickness of my dado set. I just want it to be at least a ½ inch wide. Next, I'll clamp a scrap of plywood as a sacrificial face for my rip fence, slide the fence over the dado set so that a little less than a ½ inch is exposed, turn on the saw, raise the blade a little bit and bury it in the sacrificial fence face. Then I can make a test cut. If I must, I can nudge the fence away from the blade, exposing a little bit more of the dado set so I can get my perfect rabbet width. Then I can slowly raise the blade's height and make another test cut or two until both the width and the depth of the rabbet are perfect. My rip fence can now provide a positive stop so I can make cut after cut and all the rabbets will be identical. Now why is this safe? Because there's no gap between the fence and the blade where anything may be trapped. The same process may be used to cut short tenons, but not every tenon is just a ½ inch or 3/4 inch long or however wide you can make your dado set. So what if you must cut the tenon in multiple passes? You can move the fence out of the way and try to cut back to your line, but errors are bound to creep in and all your shoulders are unlikely to be even. Instead, set the fence as a stop, then back the end of the workpiece away and begin nibbling off the waste as you move the workpiece toward the fence. Your tenon is complete when the end hits the fence. And this positive stop will ensure that all 4 shoulders are even and all subsequent tenons in the project are as well. This setup is different from the last one in that you now do have a gap between the fence and the blade, but you're producing no loose offcut. Everything is turned into sawdust, and sawdust can't kick back and injure you. For that same reason, you can safely use the rip fence and a miter gauge together to cut dados. Not only does the rip fence help you repeatedly locate the dados on multiple workpieces, but it makes the cut more accurate because it prevents the workpiece from shifting during the cut, which could lead to crooked dados. But what if you don't have a dado set? Maybe you plan to make double cut tenons or rabbets. That means you cut the cheek with a jig that holds the workpiece on end, and you finish the shoulder flat on the saw. Now you are producing a loose offcut. Does this mean you can't use the fence as a stop? You can if you do it right, and there are 2 right ways to do it. You may make the cross cut first, leaving the waste piece attached to the board, then cut the cheek, allowing the waste piece to fall away safely. Or you may cut the cheek first, then attach a sacrificial fence to your miter gauge and slide it up to the rip fence. Now it is safe for that waste piece to come loose because you're protected from both the top and the back. The offcut cannot kick back towards you as long as you push it past and clear of the blade. All of these cuts are made more accurate and repeatable by using the rip fence as a reference, and they're all safe because they have one thing in common. None of these cuts go all the way through the workpiece. You're only cutting part way through, so no loose offcut is produced that may get caught between the fence and the blade. Does this mean you can never use the rip fence as a positive stop when making through cuts? Not at all. You can do it if you use a reference block like this one. It's exactly 4 inches wide. I made it that way for 2 reasons. First, it doesn't take a math whiz to add 4 inches to any measurement, so I can still use my fence scale if it's reliable. And 4 inches will be enough to keep my fence well clear of the loose offcut. So I set the reference block ahead of the blade, and when the loose offcut comes off, it's clear of both the block and the fence. Just don't be tempted to reach for the offcut before the blade stops. A clumsy reach may still bump it toward the blade. Finally, you can add a screw to your reference block, which can act as a micro adjuster to fine-tune your cuts. It's not often that you'll hear me say it's okay to make exceptions to a safety rule, but there are some specific cuts where both the rip fence and the miter gauge can be used together, and knowing how to do it may add to the accuracy of your next project. See you next time. As the builders behind some of the top brands in the industry, Harvey Machinery has for decades been letting others take credit for their innovation. Now they've developed their own line of saws with the quality and features once reserved only for professional shops. The woodworking world is officially on notice. Harvey Machinery will be in the shadows no longer. Wait, don't go yet. If you're new here, please subscribe and remember to ring the bell. I would really appreciate that. Give us a thumbs up, or better yet, leave us a comment. I always read them. And be sure to check out the latest issue of Stumpy Nubs Woodworking Journal. It's always packed with tips, tricks, and tutorials designed to make you a better woodworker.